few things I have in common with Johnny Cash. We're both ordained ministers. Yeah, in the 70s after rehab, John actually went to seminary school for 3 years and got a degree in theology, and I paid $40 to a website called unitedministry.com so that I could marry my friends in 2016. Our likenesses have both been used in massive publications around the world. In 2004, John was on the cover of Rolling Stone magazine, and in 2008, I was featured on a website called hotskaterdudes.com. We both are former residents of both Nashville, Tennessee and Ojai, California, and both of our parents are actually former residents of Arkansas, so we've got that. John and I both survived wild, life-changing attacks from flightless birds. In the 80s, in the middle of a bitter, cold Tennessee winter, Johnny was actually out walking his land trying to get all of his livestock back inside. Now, unfortunately, Johnny had recently relapsed on speed, and when he came across his alpha male ostrich, he got a little aggressive. Both of them did. Unfortunately for John, it went to the way of the ostrich. The big bird jumped up and kicked him right in the chest, hitting him right below the sternum, breaking 4 of his ribs and gutting him almost completely. And if it weren't for his giant Tennessee belt buckle, he would have been dead. My bird attack was slightly less cinematic, but definitely as impactful and important. When I was a kid, and for most of my life, my grandparents ran a commercial chicken farm just outside of Hot Springs, Arkansas. And anytime I would go and visit, from the time I was a little boy until, well, recently, I would help them collect eggs. When I was very young, I was walking the chicken house with my grandmother. What you should know about chicken houses is that they're mostly hens, but you have to keep a few roosters in there so that the females still produce eggs. And like many men born into positions of power, roosters tend to have an inflated sense of self-importance, can be very territorial, and just really aggressive. Side note, if you've never seen a rooster attack a child, I highly recommend Googling it. It is wildly entertaining. One such rooster caught eye of me, and before I knew it, I was filled with an armful of beak and talons, and cowering and crying in the corner. My grandma caught eye of all of this, and without skipping a beat, she just ran up, grabbed the rooster by the head and snapped its neck, and then just casually walked to the back of the chicken house and threw it on top of a burn pile. Now, another thing you should know about commercial chicken houses is that the chickens don't belong to the people who own the house. They belong to my grandparents' employer, and every chicken in the chicken house needed to be accounted for. So this was a huge risk that she took. She would have to explain the death of this rooster to her employer, but it was an important gesture for her to show that I was safe, so that I understood that whenever I was in the chicken house with her, that I didn't have to be scared, and if I ever was, I could just go up and hold her hand. I was protected so long as she was there. John and I also share the loss of a family member that is as tragic as it is preventable. When John was a young boy, his older brother was doing some carpentry to support their family. One day, his older brother was working a planer, and the guard of the planer had been removed so that people could work faster. One board kicked back, and John's brother ended up falling on top of the blade, gutting him like a deer from end to end, and he died within a week. Now, this death haunted John for years. He felt in some way responsible, and he wrote songs about his brother. It was a huge part of his life. A few months before my 87-year-old grandmother passed away, she was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer. The same diagnosis that had killed her daughter, my mother, a few years prior. And she actually passed through all of the rounds of chemotherapy until the doctors determined that she was in remission, that she was essentially living cancer-free. And we all breathed a heavy sigh of relief that she had sort of outrun death for long enough to catch her breath, at least for a little while. And unfortunately, it was a little shorter than we'd all hoped. See, a few nights after she got this clean slate diagnosis from her doctors, she was lying in bed and she spiked 104-degree fever. She was rushed to the emergency room where she was quickly diagnosed with COVID-19. Within 24 hours, she was intubated, and within a week, she had passed away. We can get very caught up in numbers. We can think about the statistics and the survival rates and the percentages of people who actually end up dying from this disease, and it can make us feel much better, and it can make us feel much more comfortable. I think about Johnny Cash and his brother Jack. Now, in 1944, there were hundreds of thousands of people in the carpentry industry, and only 100 or so died. But Jack, John's brother, was less than 1%. 1% of deaths that year in carpentry. Yet, it was important to him, and it needed to be accounted for. I think about that day in the chicken house. There were 1,000 chickens. But the one that died was important, and it needed to be accounted for. The day that my grandmother died, there were nearly 300,000 positive COVID-19 cases diagnosed. There were 2,600 deaths, and she was less than 1%. But she's important, and she needs to be accounted for.